Chapter 2. Quinn. When you grow up in an orphanage, you learn to read people pretty quickly. When you grow up in an orphanage run by an abusive drunk and his neglectful wife, you learn that everyone is full of shite and you have to fend for yourself if you want to survive. The former enabled Quinn to do the latter. Reading people helped him find good marks. Then he and Lyra would rob them blind. Lyra was quick and clever, like most foxes, but she was special. She could start fires with the flick of her tail, which came in very handy when you needed to distract a mark to pickpocket them, or on cold nights when you didn't have an actual roof or walls to protect you from the harsh frost seasons. He'd learned long ago that they had to take care of themselves. That meant doing whatever it took to survive. Q didn't like looting corpses, but he wasn't above it either. Sometimes they had the best shite. When he saw her lying there half-curled against the cold, on the side of the road, just outside the dark woods, he couldn't pass up the golden opportunity. She had a whole bag of who knows what lying next to her. It could just be food, but it could be decent enough stuff to sell or use themselves. Even if it was food, he and Lyra weren't exactly feasting these days. Besides, she was dead. What did a dead girl need with whatever was in that bag? "Lyra, you know the drill," he whispered. As a fox, she was innately adept at sneaking, which was why she always made the initial approach. They'd tried other ways when they first started out on their own, but this was by far the most effective. Q sat back, partially hidden behind an old oak tree, and waited. As Lyra crept closer, he could feel her heart rate slow and her senses heighten. She was inches from the corpse when he felt a violent shock, as though he'd been struck by lightning. He cried out, as did Lyra, before nearly blacking out. Q pulled himself from behind the tree, barely able to crawl to his knees before a second, more powerful blast struck them and he keeled over completely. Quinn awoke to find himself bound to the oak he'd been using as shelter by some sort of invisible force. Lyra appeared to be unconscious still and was being kept under a small cage that looked like it was made entirely of branches, almost like the trees themselves had turned on him and Lyra and were holding them prisoner. "Lyra," he hissed as he tried to wriggle free from his invisible binds. "Lyra, wake up! What the hell's happened? We need to get out of here." "She can't hear you, and the more you struggle, the tighter the binds will get." It was a girl. A girl? How the hell's had that girl gotten the drop on him and Lyra like that? What was that shock? She was hiding close by the sound of it, but it was too dark to see anything. "Who the mucks are you? Why are you holding us? What the hells did you do?" He was scared, but more importantly, he was livid. This should never have happened to him. He was better than this, damn it. "Why were you sneaking up on us? What do you want?" Her voice was shaky and coming from behind him now, to the left. But there was something else, an animal by the sound of its light steps, closer to Lyra. He could almost make out the shape of it. Whatever it was small and nimble. "We thought you might be dead. We were checking to see if you needed help. Can you let us go now?" He kept fidgeting with his binds, but she was telling the truth. The more he moved, the tighter they became. When he started losing feeling in his fingers, he finally gave up on freeing himself. "Liar! You wanted to hurt me, rape me, kill us, and steal what little we have." Q heard the charge before he saw the flash of blue light or felt the shock. "Marks! Stop doing that. Fine, we were going to rob you, but only because we thought you were already dead. We're not killers." He must have been seeing things, or maybe he hurt his head with all the electrocution, but it looked like the shocks were actually lightning bolts coming off that small creature over by Lyra. But that was impossible, right? There was no such thing as an electric animal. Everyone knew that magical animals died out eons ago, although Lyra's fire starting would probably be considered magic. "You were going to rob my corpse?" Her question interrupted his thoughts. "And you think that's somehow supposed to make me comfortable enough to let you go?" She had moved again, closer still, but now she was more to the right, like she was trying to get a better look at him without letting him do the same. "Listen, lady, we aren't going to hurt you. We're just trying to make a living here. What are you doing sleeping on the side of the road like that anyway? You could get hurt or killed." He left the idiot implied, since she clearly already knew she'd screwed up. Only a complete moron slept on the side of the road. If you must camp out while travelling, you do it further into the woods for protection from the elements and shady people looking for trouble. "Trust me," she replied. "This wasn't my first choice. This wasn't my choice at all." The sadness and despair in her voice were palpable. He was starting to feel sorry for her until he remembered that she was currently holding them prisoner. "If you let us go, I promise we won't hurt you. Maybe we can even help you. Our place is close by. It's nothing special, but it's warm and safe, and we can feed you for the night. This is a one-night-only kind of offer, though. You can't get comfortable with us." While he wasn't thrilled about the idea of anyone seeing where he and Lyra took shelter every night, security risk and all that, he needed to do something to get her to release them, and he was starting to feel bad for her. She seemed genuinely scared and alone. That was a feeling he'd known all too well. For an agonizing few seconds, there were no sounds, like she was weighing her options and trying to decide if he was being serious or trying to trick her. Then he heard the rustle of leaves to his left, and she stepped out of the shadows and onto the road before him. She wasn't what he expected, although he didn't really know what he thought she would look like. She spoke with the presence and authority of someone who had experienced a great deal, but she had the face of an innocent little girl. "Gods, you're just a kid," he muttered, more to himself than anything. Indignant and offended, she puffed up her chest, straightened her back and said, "I'm not a child. I'm old enough to know how things work, and at 16 I'm considered an adult enchantress." Enchantress? Holy mucks. That explained the invisible binds and tree root cage, but it opened up so many new questions. He'd never met an enchantress before, although he'd heard they were beautiful beyond measure and brilliant. Beyond measure was an exaggeration. Sure, she's pretty, but physically, she's nothing special, he thought to himself. Even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie. Her hair was the colour of fallen pine needles that blanketed the forest floor. In contrast to her pale pink skin, her eyes were the colour of fresh, wild honey. She was pretty enough, but there was something about her, he couldn't quite place it, that drew him in. He had to force himself to look away. She was mesmerising, enchanting. "Why would you help me? You were about to rob my dead body. Now you're tied to a tree, and I'm supposed to believe you've had a change of heart and want to feed and shelter us for the night." She was, understandably, doubtful of his motives. But how could he explain that he wanted to help because she reminded him of himself many years ago, when he and Lyra were first thrust into the world to fend for themselves? He didn't want to show any weakness, and he was pretty sure she wouldn't believe him anyway. "Look, it's your choice. But if you don't and leave us trapped like this, none of us will survive the night." It was an exaggeration. They'd probably be fine out in the open for one night, but he wasn't interested in risking it when his home was so close by. "I've already told you I have no desire to hurt you. I'd also like to point out that you and your friend have been the only ones inflicting pain here tonight." That got her attention. She'd been pacing between Q and Lyra, but she stopped dead in her tracks at his words. "Holy Mother, you're right. Aegon, how could we have been so cruel? Protecting ourselves is one thing, but we crossed a line." She was speaking to the electric weasel creature that was standing guard over Lyra. Based on what Q knew about enchantresses, he decided that the weasel must be her familiar. "I'm so sorry," she said, waving her hand back and forth several times. It seemed to take her a few tries, but eventually he felt his hands release from the invisible binds, and the cage over Lyra melted back into the forest floor. He took his time rising to his feet, rubbing his wrists to try and get the blood circulating properly again. Slowly, With his eyes locked on her, he made his way to Lyra. Her heart was racing, and he wanted to position himself between Lyra and the girl, just in case. Lyra didn't take too kindly to being imprisoned. "We're okay, girl. Just stay calm," Quinn spoke to Lyra as he held eye contact with the girl. "Everything is fine. It turns out that the body wasn't dead, just tired and homeless. They're going to stay the night with us now."
"Have you lost what little sense you had? They locked us up and electrified us. A lot. And you want to take them home like a couple of lost puppies. Did you bump your head in between all those lightning bolts?"
Her voice practically reverberated through his mind. Their connection enabled them to share thoughts, as well as their feelings. At that moment, Q could feel the rage and confusion coursing through her veins, but he desperately needed her to calm down. That girl had already proven she and her familiar, Aegon, were a force to be reckoned with, and he could tell they desperately needed help. The best way to prove that he wasn't a threat to her was to open himself up to another attack. He turned his back on the girl and knelt down to look Lyra in the eye. "I know what happened, and you don't get to be snippy with me. I felt those shocks just as much as you. They are on edge because this isn't their home, and they don't know who to trust." He knelt closer, held Lyra's stare, and added mentally, "We know what that feels like." As he sat back, he spoke louder to ensure that the enchantress would hear him. "We snuck up on them, remember? They were just defending themselves. I've offered to let them stay the night, one night, and we can take them into town in the morning." Lyra shifted uneasily, glancing over his shoulder at the girl, then over her shoulder at the electric weasel, still positioned behind her on the edge of the road. He could feel her weighing their options, but he knew she'd see he was right and concede.
"I don't like it, and I don't trust them," she grumbled.
"Trust me." Q had seen the fear in the girl's eyes, the desperation, the need for some sense of safety or security. He recognized it because he'd had that same look for moons. He wished someone had offered them even a modicum of help in those first few moons, but no one had, not until they'd snuck into that inn's kitchen to steal some food and found Amelia. He refused to make this girl go through all of that, especially when he and Lyra were fully capable of helping. Amelia taught them better than that. Lyra could feel his determination as intensely as he could feel her doubt, but she trusted him and gave him a slight nod before relaxing her stance. Q had a feeling she wouldn't get any sleep tonight, that she'd opt to keep watch instead, but that was fine. When he turned back to the girl, he noticed that her weasel had moved and was now wrapped around her neck. She was looking at him oddly, studying him and Lyra as though she were trying to make sense of them. Q realized a little too late that she only heard his part of the conversation. Lyra hadn't spoken a word aloud. This girl probably thought he was insane. Would she follow an apparent crazy guy into a makeshift house in the woods? Q stood unmoving from his spot on the road between Lyra and the enchantress. He studied her and realized she seemed to be having a similar discussion with her familiar, attempting to get the weasel to trust her as well. It was clear that he was no more thrilled about the plan than Lyra was, but both had grudgingly conceded, for the time being at least. "We live just over that rise, by a small creek. You can follow me." Q pointed northeast of their location and started walking in the direction of their home. Lyra ran a few paces ahead. She was distancing herself because she was pouting, but she stayed close enough that she could jump to his aid if she felt it was necessary. "Thank you for helping us," the girl said as she followed him into the woods. "I'm Elena, by the way."
"Quinn,